It's the Wide Shut Webcast.
As most of you will be aware by now, there has been an incident on a carriage at the Parsons Green tube station in southwest London this morning. As the train was at the overground station, some kind of explosion occurred in one carriage, causing superficial injuries to some in the vicinity of that explosion, burns, skin damage and whatnot, while others were hurt in the panic and running that ensued afterwards as people rushed off the train and out of the station. No deaths reported, and the carriage itself was not significantly damaged. Now, there are images circulating that are purported to be the explosive device, or what remained of it, a bucket within a little shopping bag which was still on fire. But whatever caused this, it was not a high-grade or particularly sophisticated explosive. I wanted to just get some initial thoughts out there. This is now officially being treated as a terror attack. Obviously within minutes people were on Twitter trying to score points by calling it an Islamic terror attack, as if jumping ahead of an investigation makes them clever or something, but whatever, that's their bubble. But also, obviously, the mainstream media are beginning to form their narratives and make their speculations and get on their talking heads to, quote, inform the public. And I'm already seeing things that don't make sense, things that are contradictory and that are just incorrect, and also certain agendas are being pushed, particularly by Sky News this morning. One commentator brought up the fact that this was a low-grade device. We have absolutely no idea what it was made up of yet, but they decided to suggest it was TATP, or triacetone triperoxide, and that this device hadn't detonated properly, or that it was just a poor homemade explosive, and that's why there are no deaths and the carriage was not particularly damaged. He then paralleled this with 7/7, claiming that Hasib Hussein, who allegedly blew up the number 30 bus, had a similar problem, and this is why he didn't blow up a tube carriage, because he had to leave the carriage and rework his device and get a battery, and then changed his target to the bus. The issue with that is there's no evidenced timeline of Hussein boarding a train and then leaving a train. We don't necessarily know what his initial target was, just that he ended up walking around, going to a McDonald's, he went into a WH Smith's, before then seemingly boarding the bus, though no CCTV actually shows him boarding the bus or on the bus, and no eyewitnesses have described him as being on that bus. But the point is, the narrative is just not proven. He may or may not have bought a battery from Smith's. He may or may not have used that battery in a device that he may or may not have been struggling with before changing to a target that he may or may not have been on. This focus this morning on TATP is also problematic because no TATP was recovered from any of the 7/7 blast sites, and the crude peroxide mix that was found in a flat in Leeds was found to be inert, i.e. it was not explosive. The investigators that tested it could not blow it up. And in fact, the alleged bombers were not directly linked to the tubs of that mixture by forensics, just the flat in general. So long story short, this speculative anecdote being used on Sky News that this device this morning was probably TATP like on 7/7 and was a bit of a dud like Hasib Hussein's bomb is essentially nonsense, because none of it was ever borne out in the evidence. The TATP theory is also problematic because TATP is not an exothermic explosive, i.e. it reacts with very little heat, it creates little to no flames, it's more like an energetic bang of energy with a lot of smoke that can rip things apart, but it's not a bomb with a mushroom of flames or fire or anything. So this wouldn't necessarily support all of the eyewitness accounts coming out of how a big ball of fire came down the carriage, and also that people were burned by fire and singed and so on. TATP can be used in conjunction with other things, like as part of the detonator or whatever. But the broader point I'm trying to make is there's no need for Sky News to be speculating about the makeup of this device at this point. We don't know yet, and it's only going to add to the sea of confusion later. The only thing we really do know is that yes, this wasn't a very powerful device. But that doesn't necessarily mean it was intended to be a powerful device. The implication is that it was homemade by an amateur terrorist, but in not yet knowing who actually did it, we can't necessarily assume that it was a weak explosive through incompetence. What I mean is, the intention may have been more to scare than to kill. It may have been deliberately low grade. This was at an overground station with a lot of visibility and a lot of access, not an underground station where the fallout would have been much worse. So that's one thought that sort of crossed my mind. But putting that to one side, I also find it interesting how the seemingly amateur nature of this device is contrasted with that of the Manchester bombing, which almost seemed too powerful for the story that we were told, that it was made by a college dropout via a YouTube video and he built it all himself. Yet it did all this damage and it had remote detonation capabilities and people were comparing it to IRA bombs and things like that. That didn't seem to make sense to me. And if the self-taught, self-radicalized via the internet theory is true, then actually you would expect smaller botched attacks or attacks that aren't very powerful to be the norm. And you'd probably expect more of them to take place, in fact. So in that sense, yes, today could have been a lowly, self-taught, self-radicalized terrorist, or at least that's what it could logically be presented as. We just don't know yet. Again, going back to the rolling Sky News coverage of this today, which has also been focusing on the so-called need for more funding to the police and security services, which I just don't really buy. Aside from the fact that the security and intelligence services do a lot of dodgy and unaccountable things, including backing Islamic terrorism, if there is an individual that decides one day they want to build a crude device and attack people in public, there's very little you can really do to prevent that, short of having some kind of mind-reading chip inside every person in the country. There is a point that we reach where there really is nothing anybody can do, and the focus should really be on response, not prevention, not an overreaching security state. You know, I could easily walk out my house right now and attack someone. That's just the nature of human autonomy. We can't get lost in the emotion of these kinds of events and then fall into parroting things like, let's give more money to the police and MI5. Let's just throw money at the situation as if that's going to solve it. We need more police walking the streets with guns. Do we? Are police with guns supposed to stop everyone with a little shopping bag? That's just not how the world works. That's just not how a free society works. And perhaps the best headline out of this that demonstrates the runaway agendas that are at play here already is this one. London tube explosion. Donald Trump says internet must be cut off to stop further terror attacks. Responding to the terror incident at Parsons Green tube station, he said that the internet was a terrorist recruiting tool. Loser terrorists must be dealt with in a much tougher manner, he wrote on Twitter. The internet is their main recruitment tool, which we must cut off and use better. That's not really how the internet works, Trump. We don't even know who did this attack yet, and we don't even know the relevance of the internet to it. There is no way to just switch off the internet, and let's not forget, we already have Theresa May's Snoopers Charter in this country. And that legislation mandates the storing of everyone's internet data for 12 months. The authorities have the power to hack your social media accounts and mobile devices through rubber-stamped warrants, but also indiscriminately during events like terror attacks. It didn't prevent this one, did it? it didn't prevent Manchester or London Bridge, did it? But it did give Theresa May a platform to continue to call for more regulation of the internet, which makes absolutely no sense. And it also conveniently bumped her up the polls just before the election. She's a very lucky politician. This latest incident comes at a time when Theresa May and Brexit are back at the forefront of the media again, which has now been usurped by the coverage of this atrocity. Funny how terrorists seem to tacitly support Theresa May. She also likes to support them when she lifts their control orders so they can go and take out foreign leaders like Gaddafi. I'm just saying. Just as I'm recording this, unnamed BBC sources are saying the device contained a timer, so it may have been left there by somebody and not necessarily on their person. So someone might not have set it off beside themselves. It could have been put on at an earlier stop or something like that, in theory. And police have confirmed that a manhunt is underway. Early reports on Twitter of a man with a knife associated with this are fake news. It's just someone on Twitter that got retweeted and copied by the news, etc. Now, judging from the fact that there is very little damage to this tube carriage, CCTV should have caught all of this at virtually every step of the way, and we might actually expect footage of whoever handled this bag and bucket to exist. Now, whether that does come out, we'll have to wait and see. As with 7/7, we never got any crucial CCTV on 7/7 when the bombers were actually boarding their targets or on their targets, which has always been a bizarre fact. Either it wasn't recording, the tapes were in, it was damaged during the blast. There was never really a concrete explanation other than, whoops, we don't have the CCTV. But with all the CCTV in London, there should be images of this Parsons Green incident at some point. But that's it for now. I've been watching this all unfold this morning, as I say, and I just wanted to give a little bit of balance to what I've been seeing. I expect I'll do some articles and maybe a longer podcast on this in the days to come as various things come out and various narratives and agendas take form. But keep it locked here on wideshut.co.uk, and I'll see you then.